Asahina Wakaba, a girl who hated her life and dreaded waking up every morning. This girl would rather sleep straight to heaven's gates than face yet another morning. On this particular morning, Wakaba woke up to what she believed would be yet another terrible day. She dragged her flat, shapeless body to the bathroom, glared into the mirror, and hated the fact that she looked like a 50-year-old drug addict. Wakaba genuinely believed she was the ugliest girl on earth and wished her life came with a Snapchat filter. Wakaba lazily slipped into her school uniform, clutched her chest, and dreaded the thought of facing yet another doomsday. Upon entering the sitting room, Wakaba forced a weak smile and greeted her family. Her dad, a four-eyed otaku, oblivious to the internal war Wakaba waged every morning, remarked that she seemed rather cheerful that day. Her mom, equally unaware, noted that Wakaba looked well-rested. Meanwhile, her younger sister, Futaba, shifted everyone's focus to how sunny the morning was, a welcome change after a week of intense rain. After having a quick chat with her dad over some otaku stuff, Wakaba glanced at the wall clock and realized that she was late for the doomsday other people called school. Consequently, she and her sister, Futaba, swiftly abandoned their old man, still yapping about some nerdy stuffs, slipped on their shoes and dashed off to their respective schools. For Wakaba, however, home was the only place she had peace, as school was nothing but a living nightmare where she got tormented daily. Upon stepping into her classroom, the demons she called classmates began their usual gossip about how Wakaba was a lonely weirdo who'd rather hug a cactus than chat with anyone. Nanes, the resident witch with an ego bigger than her IQ, commented that Wakaba's shameless existence irritated her to no end. Simultaneously, with her head bowed, Wakaba wallowed on how miserable her life had become over the months. All Wakaba ever wanted was to attend school like any normal girl her age. But since she started this nightmare called school, making friends had proven to be just as difficult as most viewers finding a chick to warm their bed at night. Eventually, Wakaba gave up entirely when she realized her personality was simply whack, and she was nothing more than a hopeless case. As a result, over the past 6 months, her classmates had insulted and tormented her every day, turning Wakaba into a constant target of ridicule. Suddenly, a hand slammed onto her desk, jolting Wakaba from her thoughts. It was Nanes, the mean girl, who demanded to know why Wakaba had been ignoring her. Hesitantly, Wakaba simply asked what the issue was, and in response, Nanes smugly reminded Wakaba how much she despised her and wished she could be erased from reality. Wakaba fell silent, unsure of what to say, so feeling snubbed, Nanes grabbed Wakaba's hair, yanked it, and warned her never to act superior. Before things could escalate further, the teacher burst into the room, prompting Wakaba to awkwardly flee the classroom in embarrassment while Nanes and her evil minions cackled mockingly. Once outside the school building, Wakaba felt a wave of relief and settled down to eat her lunch. Lunchtime was the only moment at school when this girl experienced some kind of peace and was a little bit close to home and her family. Truthfully, if she could, Wakaba would ditch school faster than you can say drop out, but she feared that doing so would cause her family to worry. Nevertheless, Wakaba resolved to put on her big girl's pants and tough out one academic year, hoping her class would change afterward. Unexpectedly, while eating in her peaceful hideout, Wakaba heard a loud, croaky laugh. Startled, she peeked through the bushes to investigate. At that moment, Wakaba spotted 3 boys from another class locked in a heated argument. Bizun, a jock with temper, was furiously debating something with a chubby, pumpkin boy, while a blonde boy named Shun was playing peacemaker like a misroad UN ambassador, urging them to chill. However, Bizun adamantly refused, claiming the fat pig had insulted him and he wouldn't let it slide. As she observed, Wakaba recognized them as the school's Big Three. Shun was the school's Albert Einstein, consistently topping exams, even nationally. Bizun, on the other hand, was the Cristiano Ronaldo of the school. He joined the soccer team a year ago and, thanks to his athletic prowess, became a starter. Also, Bixen's parents were so stinking rich that they gave him a maid to attend to his every need. Then there's Haruto, the sugar daddy-bellied boy everyone despised for being a greasy mess. This dude once got hauled out of the entrance ceremony for popping a boner to adult videos. While the boys bickered over 3D versus 2D waifus, Haruto boldly declared his allegiance to 2D girls. Yet, despite being the school's most hated outcast, Haruto was so happy like he'd seen Kim Kardashian's privates. Seeing Haruto so unbothered stirred something in Wakaba, for she hadn't smiled once since starting school. Later, as school ended, Nanes and her squad strolled home, complaining about how dull school was with no juicy gossip to discuss. Just then, they overheard Haruto and Bizun still arguing fiercely near the school gate, nearly coming to blows. Before fists could fly, Bizun's maid intervened, announcing his lunch was ready, leaving Haruto sobbing that he didn't have a servant to pamper his tubby belly. Upon seeing greasy Haruto, Nanace shuddered in disgust. To her, Haruto was the school's walking trash heap and had become even more unbearable in the past recent days since he started his bizarre friendship with Bizun. Suddenly, a wicked idea struck Nanace. She reasoned she could eliminate the two most annoying people in her life and spark some sizzling school drama all at once. So the next day, Nanace strutted into class, flaunting a fancy mirror like it was the Holy Grail. Naturally, everyone's eyes were on it, but her true target was Wakaba. So, while the class gawked, she marched straight to Wakaba, who tried to hide her curiosity and insisted she wanted her, specifically, to see it. Wakaba was stunned, wondering why Nanace, who despised her so much, was suddenly showing interest in her. Noticing Wakaba's hesitation, Nanace flashed a sly smile like a predator and encouraged Wakaba to come closer for a better look. Reluctantly, with all eyes on her, Wakaba stood and approached. Nanace then handed her the ornament, and as Wakaba admired its craftsmanship, it accidentally slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor and shattering into pieces. Feigning shock, though it was all part of her plan, Nanace shrieked, demanding to know what Wakaba had done. Nervously, Wakaba apologized, stammering that someone had pushed her. Nanace retorted that a simple sorry wouldn't suffice, claiming the ornament was an expensive birthday gift. Wakaba kept apologizing, but in response, Nanace declared she'd forgive her on one condition. Desperate, Wakaba agreed to anything. With that, Nanace smirked wickedly and announced that, as punishment, Wakaba must confess to the sweaty, pudgy Haruto. And not only that, she also had to become the burger boy's girlfriend. Upon hearing this, Wakaba was shocked and immediately fell silent. Nanace asked if she knew Haruto from Class 1, to which Wakaba nervously replied that she did. Wakaba recalled Haruto as the fat, dumb perv whom everyone in school branded a disgusting nerd who constantly spouted creepy nonsense. Nanace pointed out that her beef with Haruto stemmed from how his mere existence irritated her to oblivion, especially since he'd grown cocky lately. Thus, Nanace figured it was time to teach the hippo some harsh lessons. Wakaba anxiously demanded to know how confessing to the fat creep would teach him anything, and in response, Nanace snapped that she was a moron for asking such a pointless question. Nanace revealed her diabolical plan. She stated that since Haruto was a flabby virgin who'd never sniffed a girl's thighs, Wakaba, decent looking enough, would confess love to him, getting the fat boy all giddy and clingy like a monkey. Then, the real wickedness would begin. The two would date like any normal couple, convincing Haruto he'd bagged the chick of his dream, only to shatter his brittle heart in pieces by revealing it was all a prank. Furthermore, Nanace added that while Haruto might claim to be a tough guy, the heartbreak would crush him, forcing him to spend his remaining school days in obscurity and silence. However, Nanace warned that if Wakaba refused her sadistic scheme, she'd have no choice but to tell her parents about the broken ornament. At that moment, Wakaba realized she'd been set up. Everything up until now had been an elaborate setup meticulously orchestrated by Nanace. Regrettably, Wakaba insulted herself for not seeing it sooner, and worse yet, she was stuck with the task of emotionally obliterating a guy who, to be fair, had never even farted in her direction, let alone do anything to hurt her. In reflection, Wakaba's big dream had been to pick her own Prince Charming, not being forced to fake date a hog so hated he'd probably get booed at his own funeral. However, if she rejected Nanace's plan, Nanace and her evil cronies would bully her relentlessly, and Nanace would make sure she'd be paying off that broken ornament until her grandkids graduated. With this in mind, Wakaba agreed to the scheme, but throughout that day in class, Wakaba was a nervous wreck, dreading how she'd confess to Haruto. The moment of doom arrived when Haruto barreled into the classroom like an overexcited walrus, announcing that someone had summoned him. Glancing around, Haruto remarked that a certain Wakaba had asked to see him. Just then, Bizun, who'd tagged along, urged Haruto to hurry up so they could resume their argument about who would win a fight, Goku or Prime Saitama. But before Wakaba could even breathe, Nanace shoved her straight into Haruto's line of vision and informed him that Wakaba had summoned him because she had something important to tell him. Haruto, curious, asked Wakaba if she needed anything from him, to which Wakaba shyly replied that she did. Yet, when Wakaba tried to speak, she froze. Her tongue turned to cement, and she was unable to utter a single word. Noticing her hesitation, Nanace took over and boldly declared to Haruto that the girl standing before him was madly, deeply, hopelessly in love with him. Haruto froze, rubbed his double chin, tilted his head like a confused walrus, smirked, and cracked that it must be April Fools in July. Slightly annoyed by his flippancy, Nanace snapped that it wasn't a joke and that they were dead serious. Wakaba, now feeling like a condemned prisoner, finally forced herself to confirm it wasn't a joke. At that, Haruto short-circuited. His knees gave out, and he collapsed like a Jenga tower, stunned at what he was hearing. Clutching his head, Haruto glitched out, muttering repeatedly that he'd never thought a girl would actually like his creepy vibe. While Haruto stood there, blushing like a tomato, Wakaba, shaking like a wet feather, wondered if she really had to confess or if she could just admit it was a prank. However, before she could reconsider, Nanace bellowed her name like a drill sergeant, yanking her back to her nightmare. Realizing she was trapped, Wakaba mustered every ounce of willpower she had left, sacrificed her dignity on the altar of deception, and confessed her undying love to Haruto. She even begged the Blubber King to date her, making the scene 10 times more humiliating. Haruto just stood there, looking like a bowling pin, leaving everyone wondering if he'd just seen Medusa's face. The tension got so awkward that Bizen had to break the silence, stating that Haruto was a capital loser who preferred 2D waifus to real chicks. But before the nosy donkey could finish his statement, Haruto snapped back to reality, jumped in front of Wakaba, and accepted to date her faster than you click skip ad on YouTube. Haruto pleaded that if Wakaba would be his girlfriend, he'd definitely date her. Throwing his hands up like he had won a free supply of bacon, Haruto joyfully screamed, "Mama, I made it." Then, just to be sure he wasn't dreaming, Haruto asked Wakaba again if she really wanted to date him, and Wakaba replied yes. Triple checking, Haruto asked once more if Wakaba was absolutely certain, and his eyes lit up when Wakaba said she wanted them to couple up. Overjoyed, Haruto shouted that he'd finally gotten a girlfriend and wouldn't die a sweaty virgin after all. With tears streaming down his face, Haruto thanked Wakaba for agreeing to be his boo, though deep down, Haruto felt like a monster for toying with the clueless chump. Just then, Nanace began clapping and cheering for the new couple, proclaiming they looked made for each other. Haruto, dumbfounded, turned to them and asked if they were Wakaba's friends. Nanace, clearly insulted, clarified that they weren't just friends but classmates, too. With the confession complete, Bizen urged Haruto to wrap it up so they could leave. So, Haruto told Wakaba his friends were waiting and then asked if she'd walk home with him after school, catching her off guard. Noticing her shocked expression, Haruto clarified he just wanted to parade her as his trophy girlfriend to his buddies, so Wakaba agreed and thanked him for the invite. With that, Bizen grabbed Haruto by the collar and dragged him out of the classroom, leaving Wakaba to collapse on her knees in despair as they exited. Nanace and her gang wasted no time circling Wakaba like vultures, mocking her for actually going through with the confession and making Mr. Porkchops cry worse than a girl. Grinning, Nanace commended Wakaba for the Oscar performance and instructed her to keep up the lie by playing the sweet girlfriend. Nanace added that after all, Haruto was just an eternal virgin anyway, and Wakaba was doing the dumb truck of rubbish a favor by making a man out of him. Moreover, Nanace teased that with Wakaba as the school's gloomy girl and Haruto as the creepy body odor nerd, they were the perfect match made in cringe heaven. After school that day, Wakaba remained haunted by the hideous, unforgivable lie she'd told, one that would actually hurt someone for real, and was certain she'd regret it in the future. As Haruto cheerfully hollered at her from outside the school gate, skipping with glee, Wakaba couldn't unsee how pathetically happy the tubby fool was and dreaded the day the ruse would finally reveal. Wakaba met up with Haruto, and immediately, Haruto wasted no time to flex her to his social circle. First, he introduced Shu as his childhood friend, and then Bizen as his partner in crime to her. The boys exchanged pleasantries with Wakaba, and in turn, Wakaba introduced herself, mentioning that it was genuinely nice to meet them. Before departing, Bizen and Shu congratulated Haruto on finally bagging a girlfriend since they had thought he would die an old, lonely, greasy virgin, and then suggested they leave the lovebirds alone. As the boys bid the latest couple goodbye and walked away, Wakaba commented on how close Haruto seemed with his buddies. Haruto replied, informing her that they'd been friends like forever and suggested they also head home. As they started walking, Wakaba glanced to the side and spotted Nanace staring at them coldly from inside the school building, like Cinderella's evil stepmother. That was when Wakaba remembered that Nanace had threatened her to get all cozy with the fat chub and to ensure she nailed the next phase of the twisted game. Haruto noticed Wakaba had zoned out and asked what was wrong. But Wakaba quickly regained herself and assured him she was fine. Throughout their stroll home, Wakaba observed that Haruto was visibly nervous, yet the dude tried to channel his inner Kevin Hart, cracking jokes left and right in an attempt to make Wakaba laugh and did everything possible to keep the conversation alive. Haruto also tried learning more about Wakaba, asking about her family, favorite movies, and music preferences, but Wakaba dodged with answers more vague than a politician's promises. Still, Haruto played the gentleman's card, walking Wakaba all the way to her house. Before leaving, he assured her that his own place was just down the road and he could handle the perilous journey alone. Although Wakaba felt relieved to be finally free from the suffocating blob draining her, Nanese's orders echoed in her skull to complete the assignment. As Haruto bid her farewell and turned to leave, he noticed her sad expression and demanded to know what was bothering her. Wakaba nervously stammered, asking if he was free on Saturday, to which Haruto replied he wasn't sure, and then pressed to know why she asked. So, with her head tilted downward, Wakaba nervously revealed that she'd love to go on a date with him that day. Saturday arrived, and Wakaba was dressed up since, even though it was a fake date, it marked her first time going out with a boy. Sadly, a day that was supposed to be filled with happy memories was now cursed, all thanks to one massive lie. Wakaba even prayed for rain, hoping the universe would have mercy and cancel the date with Shark Boy. Upon reaching the rendezvous, Wakaba noticed Haruto dressed like a failed rapper with 3,000 mixtapes, shaking nervously with legs wobbling, as if he were about to release Hot Pea. Immediately spotting Wakaba, Haruto waved excitedly to catch her attention. Wakaba walked straight to him and decided to take off the sad expression on her face. So, she forced a smile and apologized for keeping him waiting. Haruto fidgeted, saying it was cool, and then suggested they start the date. Together, the couple headed into the mall, but noticing people staring, Wakaba felt utterly embarrassed walking beside Greaseball McBurgerhands and wished the ground would just open up and swallow her whole. Before entering the mall, Haruto remarked that, despite the cloudy atmosphere, they should try to enjoy themselves, to which Wakaba nodded shyly in agreement. Inside, Haruto noticed the place was packed and suggested they see a movie instead. He asked if Wakaba preferred romance, action, or horror, and after pausing briefly to think, Wakaba said she'd love to see the latest trendy film. She chose a fantasy movie about the world's tiniest and most useless fairy. Haruto agreed and ran off to get the tickets, leaving Wakaba alone with her thoughts. As she waited, Wakaba realized how long it had been since someone outside her family actually cared about her. During the movie, Wakaba, deciding to make the most of the mess, tried to relax. But then, disaster struck. In a shocking moment, Haruto suddenly grabbed her hand, causing her to scream. She slapped his hand away because the sheer weight of his meaty palm had nearly paralyzed her delicate fingers. Haruto, sweating nervously, immediately began apologizing, and seeing his genuine remorse, Wakaba accepted it, also apologizing for swatting his hand. As they continued watching, Haruto trembled throughout, and by the movie's end, he couldn't take it anymore. So, after the movie, Haruto bowed his head and apologized again, this time explaining that he had zero experience with romance and panicked. Wakaba, standing there in disbelief, listened as Haruto practically exposed he had zero experience with romance and dating. Then, in a desperate attempt to make it up to her, Haruto asked if there was anything he could do. Wakaba, seeing an opportunity, suggested window shopping, to which Haruto agreed and thanked her for being chill about it. Following that, Haruto pointed at the arcade and asked if she'd like to go in, to which Wakaba agreed. Inside, Wakaba's eyes widened in surprise at the variety of games that clearly impressed her. Haruto inquired about the type of game she'd like to play, but Wakaba admitted it was her first time at an arcade. In response, Haruto offered to be her guide and show her around. So without delay, Haruto inserted a cartridge into a machine, and coins clanked out. But before they started, Wakaba offered to pay for the arcade games since Haruto had covered the movie. But Haruto declined, insisting he wasn't the type to go 50-50 with his girl. Smiling, Haruto thanked her for not being a leech, like those IG babes who just drain a guy's wallet, and then suggested they start playing, proposing the UFO catcher as the easiest game. But Haruto then pointed out that the game's arm was weaker than your pull-out game, and the prizes sucked. So he asked if she was good at quizzes, to which Wakaba confirmed she was. Once the trivia game began, Haruto explained that Wakaba just needed to touch the right answer on the screen. Wakaba, intrigued, stared at the screen like it was an alien tech, and as she prepared herself, she appreciated how Haruto had found a game for her. So, she slotted a coin, and when the game started, Haruto instructed Wakaba to click the human-shaped fairy, which she did. At that moment, the first quiz question appeared. Wakaba wasn't certain of the answer, but with Haruto's nerdy help, they teamed up and answered correctly, and the machine confirmed their success. Wakaba was shocked her empty brain could pull it off since she had always thought her brain was rusty. While Haruto celebrated their small victory like they found the cure to cancer, Wakaba, still baffled by his genius, admitted she didn't fully understand the question. But Haruto told her not to dwell on it since the goal was to clear the questions, not become a scholar. Encouragingly, Haruto clarified their goal was to ace the questions without mistakes, urging her to stay spirited and keep playing, which visibly sparked Wakaba up. After answering a couple of brain teasers, they finally reached the last question to end the game. Wakaba swallowed hard, terrified since this was her first time getting so far in a quiz game. She had loved playing games as a younger child, but typically, she'd quit halfway through any game that was tougher than Candy Crush. Determined not to flop this trivia game, Wakaba clicked on the final question and was shocked to see it was in English. Instantly, she grew nervous because her English was so bad even Google Translate would crash, and with every delay, the timer ticked down. Staring at the question and trying to read between the lines only deepened her confusion. Wakaba had always struggled with indecision, and because of this flaw, she'd often lagged behind. As minutes turned to seconds, Wakaba became even more anxious and had nearly given up. But noticing her hesitation, Haruto urged her to think outside the box. Haruto explained that the answer was tricky, and all she needed to do was pick the option that stood out from the rest. Furthermore, Haruto added that, by the way, he hated being left out of the game and would appreciate it if she included him. Upon hearing this, Wakaba understood very well what it meant to be left, so she took Haruto's advice, clenched her fist in determination, and, after briefly studying the options, chose the odd one. Just then, the system announced her answer was correct, shocking her, and congratulated her for clearing the game with a perfect score. Overjoyed, Wakaba didn't realize when she leaned in and high-fived Haruto. Reflecting, Wakaba considered how, even though it was just a game, it left her feeling accomplished, joyful, and proud. Yet, knowing she'd nailed the last question thanks to Haruto, she thanked him. Haruto, brushing it off modestly, explained that while his English was solid, he was a total dunce at everything else. Then, Haruto asked if Wakaba was tired or wanted to play more games, to which Wakaba eagerly exclaimed she'd love to keep going. With that, they tried other games, and while at it, Wakaba pondered how, in all her years, she'd never had so much fun and felt glad she'd gone out with Haruto. When it was lunchtime, Haruto suggested they try a fancy restaurant he knew in the mall. But then, Haruto noticed Wakaba clutching her bag tightly like it held Secret Service informations, and then she started rummaging inside nervously. Soon, she pulled out a wrapped box, leaving Haruto stunned because he instantly recognized it as food. Wakaba confirmed it was, revealing she'd brought homemade bentos. Suddenly, she noticed Haruto staring at the food intensely like a starved dog. And before she could process it, the fat boy began crying and laughing like a maniac, startling her. Haruto explained that no girl had ever made him a homemade bento, so he'd cherish hers like a priceless artifact. Following that, they found a quiet spot to enjoy the bentos, and as Wakaba watched Haruto devour them like he hadn't eaten since Obama left office, she recalled that Nanes had threatened her to bring homemade food, hoping it'd ruin their date. Ironically, the bentos became the icing on the cake of a wonderful date. Wakaba figured that if Haruto enjoyed them so much, it meant he liked them, and she felt delighted she'd made them. After everything she'd seen, Wakaba realized Haruto was an incredible person. Whether happy, angry, or sad, he never hid his emotions, and nothing seemed to dampen his spirit. Additionally, Wakaba discovered Haruto was far from the annoying weirdo school rumors painted him as. She'd initially expected him to ramble non-stop about otaku stuff on their date, but instead, Haruto had been considerate and gentlemanly throughout. Remarkably, he'd even forced a weird hermit like her, with social anxiety, out of her shell to hold a real conversation. Just then, Haruto snapped her from her thoughts, shyly apologizing for eating like a starved hyena and praising her cooking. Curious, he asked if she often cooked at home, given her MasterChef skills. Wakaba replied that she always helped her mom in the kitchen, unlike her kid sister, who'd burn water if you let her near a stove. Haruto, shocked to learn Wakaba had a sister, asked if they were a family of 4, to which Wakaba confirmed they were, adding that they were really close. Wakaba shared that she took pride in her sister, Futaba, who, unlike her, was bright, cheerful, and athletic. Honestly, Wakaba confided in Haruto that she sometimes envied Futaba for being so different from her. Wakaba explained that her mother, though polite and gentle, could rip off your face and snap when truly angry. As for her dad, the man was a creep with an odd hobby of collecting plastic Bandai figurines like a nerdy pack rat. With glistening eyes, Haruto remarked that he, too, was a huge Bandai robot fan. Haruto asked if Wakaba liked them, and Wakaba confirmed that her whole family was big fans. Wakaba emphasized that she was big on family and could talk about them for hours. While she rambled on, Wakaba noticed Haruto never showed discomfort or boredom, but rather listened and nodded with a smile. So, she asked about his family, too. Excitedly, Haruto shared that his father, a teacher, had a joyful personality and loved making silly dad jokes despite his profession. He revealed that his mom was the opposite, strong-spirited and fiercely competitive. For instance, Haruto revealed that she'd recently camped out at a supermarket at 4 AM to win a bargain sale. Wakaba chuckled as Haruto explained that his mom's competitiveness sometimes got out of hand, and though he tried to stop her, his younger sister, Mifuyu, would egg her on. Wakaba was shocked to hear Haruto had a little sister, and Haruto clarified that, despite not resembling each other much, Mifuyu was beautiful and smart. For that reason, he revealed that his buddy Shu had been simping over his sister for years. Yet, instead of reciprocating, his savage sister toyed with Shu for amusement. Suddenly, Haruto paused and, with a flustered face, said he wanted to ask Wakaba something. Wakaba, curious, encouraged him to go ahead, so Haruto swallowed hard, clenched his fist, took a deep breath, and nervously demanded to know what she liked about him. However, noticing Wakaba's discomfort with the question, Haruto grew intensely nervous. Haruto admitted it was idiotic of him to ask such a thing and begged her not to answer. Just then, they heard a boy's voice telling his dad to look at a chimp who escaped the zoo. Wakaba and Haruto turned toward the sound and saw a strange boy pointing at Haruto, dazzled. The boy alerted his father that a fat chimp had escaped the zoo and stolen human clothes, like in Planet of the Apes. But suddenly, the boy's father grabbed the little troublemaker and apologized to Haruto for his son's chimp remark. Surprisingly, instead of scolding the boy, Haruto approached him and introduced himself. The man, still trying to rein in his reckless son, shouted at the boy to quit bugging the couple, and then teased that their movie was about to start. Curious, Haruto asked the kid the name of the movie they were planning to see, and the boy replied that it was about penguins. Haruto then shared that if it was the penguin anime he meant, it was a great film with solid ratings. To clarify, Haruto asked the youngster if it was 8 million deities, and the boy confirmed it was. Excitedly, Haruto decided to be a spoiler by revealing that the movie explored the countless deities in Japan. Haruto explained to the lad that everything in the film, from rain and fire to even his mom's coochie, had a deity. But before Haruto could reveal too much about the movie, the father yanked the boy away, and they left. Nevertheless, seeing Haruto's encyclopedia knowledge, Wakaba was genuinely impressed. So, while strolling through the mall, Wakaba mentioned how Haruto had discussed 8 million deities with a boy like he was the movie's director. Haruto, downplaying it, said it was just trivia he'd picked up from reading. Switching topics, Wakaba noted that the movie the boy wanted to see was rather a sad one, as it featured a deity who was forgotten by everyone. Noticing her sudden sadness, Haruto stopped walking and told Wakaba that some things in this world couldn't be seen with eyes alone. Haruto further explained that, though invisible, these things were always by our side, protecting us. Intrigued, Wakaba asked if he meant deities or perhaps fairies. Speaking of fairies, Haruto revealed that in the West, legends said people reincarnated as fairies. Haruto claimed that, while most people couldn't see fairies, he was among the rare few who could. Haruto boasted that before they met, fairies had told him Wakaba was a cute, innocent girl. Hearing this, Wakaba froze in shock like she had been tased. But Haruto grinned and admitted he was just kidding. But the joke nearly gave Wakaba a heart attack, so she playfully swatted his back to show her displeasure. Mid-swat, Haruto asked if she felt better now, leaving Wakaba puzzled. Wakaba asked what he meant by if she was feeling better now, and Haruto explained that she'd seemed down that morning. But now he was relieved to see her mood had improved. At those words, Wakaba's heart skipped a beat, making her wonder why she suddenly felt at ease. She questioned if fate had decided to be kind by turning a dreaded day into a fun-filled one. But just then, she received a message from Nanes, the evil witch, asking how the date was going and demanding a photo as proof to show Wakaba really went for the date. Noticing Wakaba's sudden mood shift, Haruto asked what was wrong, to which Wakaba initially said nothing but later asked if Haruto could grant her one request. Haruto thumped his chest, assuring her he'd oblige if it was within his power. Wakaba thanked him and then requested that they take a selfie together, shocking Haruto. Nervously, Haruto agreed it'd be his pleasure, and Wakaba quickly snapped a selfie of them. Afterward, Wakaba thanked him for agreeing, but Haruto, seeing she was still moody, suggested they sit on a bench. While seated, Haruto mentioned he often visited the shop behind the bench and stepped inside. Upon returning, Haruto said he'd gotten the manager's permission to use the bench and handed Wakaba a cold tea. Wakaba thanked him, opened it, and took a big gulp. However, at that moment, Wakaba remembered Haruto asking what she liked about him and realized the fat boy didn't cringe her as much anymore. Honestly, she now saw him as a genuinely nice guy, though still not someone she'd climb into bed with. But suddenly, Wakaba noticed Haruto fixated on something and demanded to know what he was staring at. Haruto, flustered, tried to deny it, claiming he wasn't looking at anything, but right then, an ugly hairy freak of nature stood before them. Haruto introduced the hairy mutant to Wakaba as Aoi, the manager of the store, and then assured her that although the dude might look like prehistoric Tarzan on crack, he actually was a nice person. Somewhat relieved, Wakaba introduced herself, and just as she did, Aoi asked if she was the fat loser's girlfriend. Before Wakaba could even reply, Aoi laughed hysterically, saying he'd never believed the spread yeast could ever bag a hot chick in this world. Still chuckling, Aoi remarked that Haruto having a girlfriend proved even blind people could ride horses. After amusing himself, Aoi asked Haruto if he still wanted the toy he'd always eyed in the shop. Without waiting for a reply, Aoi dragged Haruto inside to finalize the purchase. Shortly, Haruto emerged, grinning and holding a box. Intrigued, Wakaba asked what he'd bought, and Haruto excitedly explained it was a limited edition SD ratio plastic robot. Not stopping there, Haruto went full otaku mode, explaining a bunch of nerdy rubbish pertaining to the toy. But Aoi quickly interrupted, warning that his rambling might make his new girlfriend hate him. Regretfully, Haruto admitted that even after he had sworn not to talk about anything otaku related in front of his new girl, he had eventually fumbled. To cheer him up, Aoi gifted Haruto another robot version and suggested he give it to his girlfriend. But this annoyed Haruto, who called Aoi a buffin for thinking any girl would actually want something like that. Amid their squabble, Wakaba silently stared at the robot, remembering that her dad once owned something similar, and Aoi noticed her odd gaze. Aoi clarified that he was joking about giving the toy to Wakaba, but hadn't expected her to show interest. Turning to Haruto, Aoi pointed out that his girlfriend liked it and offered to sell it for $2,000. Before Haruto could respond, Aoi shoved the toy to Wakaba and thanked them for their patronage. As Wakaba and Haruto left the mall and headed home, Wakaba thanked Haruto for the toy, and Haruto offered to assemble it if she needed help. Nearing the train station, Haruto asked if she wanted him to walk her there, but Wakaba said she was fine alone and bid him goodbye, ending their first date. After their first date, Wakaba and Haruto grew close and began heading home together after school like some married old couple. Wakaba no longer felt embarrassed or cringy walking with Haruto. Moreover, as they strolled home together, Wakaba had grown accustomed to chatting with Haruto like they were besties, barely feeling like she was enduring any punishment. With that, Wakaba started to believe their closeness was sufficient for the relationship. However, she was sorely mistaken because Nanes, utterly disgusted by the situation, made it clear to Wakaba that friendzoning the hippo wasn't part of the deal. Nanes pointed out that Wakaba wasn't a child anymore and needed to invest all her emotions into her relationship with Haruto. Furthermore, Nanes warned that staying pals meant the torture fest would drag on forever. Together with her cohorts, Nanes insisted that Wakaba must act as a girlfriend, not a friend. In addition, Nanes remarked that she'd forgive Wakaba for breaking the agreement by friendzoning Haruto. Yet, Nanes sternly emphasized that on their next date, Wakaba must kiss the over-bloated whale. Wakaba froze in shock and pleaded with Nanes that she couldn't lock lips with the meathead. But Nanes called her a brain-dead Barbie and reminded her she had no choice. Nanes ordered Wakaba to comply, and with no choice, Wakaba caved to the evil witch's decree. On the next date, Wakaba arrived at the rendezvous dressed up, but deeply troubled about how she'd kiss Haruto. However, upon reaching the spot 30 minutes late, Haruto was nowhere to be found. Wakaba knew Haruto could be greasy and overweight, but he was definitely punctual. Concerned, Wakaba worried something might be wrong and considered calling him. But then, she decided to wait a bit, hoping his train was just delayed. After waiting a couple of hours, Wakaba grew increasingly anxious that something bad had happened to Haruto and resolved to phone him. Yet, before she could dial, his call came through, startling her and nearly causing her to drop her phone. Wakaba answered the call, and Haruto apologized over the line for making her wait, explaining he had urgent business and couldn't make their planned date. Though disappointed, Wakaba felt relieved that Haruto was safe, not injured or ill. She replied, assuring Haruto she was fine with it and adding they'd see each other at school. Just as the call ended, Wakaba spotted Teichai, the little troublemaker from their first date, and his dad, making her wonder why they always crossed paths during her date plans with Haruto. Surprisingly, this time, Wakaba noticed Teichai in tears, desperately asking if Haruto was okay. Shocked and intrigued, Wakaba approached Teichai and his dad, inquiring what was wrong. Teichai, sobbing, exclaimed it was all his fault. His dad chimed in, explaining to Wakaba that while he was chatting with an old pal, he'd lost sight of Teichai. After searching the mall fruitlessly, Haruto, who happened to be passing by, helped him find the boy. But while bringing Teichai back, the excited child dashed across the road without looking and nearly got hit by a truck kun on a mission. In a heroic effort, Haruto swooped in like Spider-Man to save him, though he ended up falling into a muddy ditch like a pig in paradise. Teichai's dad noted that Haruto was covered in mud from head to toe, and when he rushed to check on him, Haruto stood up, asked the time, and bolted. Concerned, Teichai's dad begged Wakaba to let him know if Haruto was okay once she reached him. At that moment, Wakaba was more worried about whether Haruto had hurt his head. Hurriedly, she headed to the train station, hoping to catch up with him. Just then, she spotted a dude shaped like a ninja turtle trudging along and realized it must be Haruto. Wasting no time, Wakaba dashed toward him, but before reaching him, she saw he was filthy, looking like he'd wrestled a swamp monster and lost. She also observed that everyone around seemed irritated by his appearance and was avoiding him like he was a walking STD. Angered, she clenched her fist, annoyed that these clueless people had no idea of Haruto's Justice League-worthy performance. But suddenly, she hid behind a wall when Bizun and Shu surrounded Haruto, demanding to know what had happened. They pressed Haruto about what happened to his date and why he smelled worse than a dumpster. But just then, Bizun noticed some randoms filming Haruto, treating him like some freak show for their TikTok clout. Furious, Bizun yelled at them to mind their own business and scram. With the onlookers gone, Bizun demanded the real story from Haruto. Haruto, forcing a smile through the pain, lied that he'd been clumsy and tripped by accident. Overhearing this, Wakaba fumed, wondering why Haruto had to lie. Even his friends didn't buy the weak excuse, but Haruto insisted it was the truth until they relented. Eventually, the boys teased Haruto for being fat and clumsy and then asked about his date. Haruto explained he'd cancelled by lying to Wakaba that he had an urgent business to attend to. Haruto pointed out that meeting Wakaba while smelling worse than a trailer hobo's armpit would have embarrassed her. Meanwhile, Wakaba, listening from hiding, grew emotional. Still speaking, Haruto admitted he was used to people mocking him, but with tears streaming down his face, he said he couldn't bear Wakaba facing that humiliation. Seeing Haruto so emotional touched Wakaba deeply. Meanwhile, Haruto apologized to his bros for fumbling the bag by stranding Wakaba, but Shu reassured him Wakaba wouldn't dump him over it. Still, they advised him as his bros to apologize to her ASAP. The boys then helped Haruto up and assisted him homeward. While in hiding, Wakaba could only dwell on Haruto's words about sparing her embarrassment. After the boys left, she emerged from hiding and, on her way home, spotted a girl crying under a tree. She bent down and asked what was wrong, to which the girl explained her bag was stuck in the tree. Wakaba retrieved the bag and handed it over, delighting the girl. The following day in school, Wakaba reflected on how she couldn't sleep the night before, as her mind kept replaying the scene of Haruto crying like a baby while insisting he could never bear to see her embarrassed. Meanwhile, as she walked to class, she recalled how she had refused to tell Nanace that the date with Haruto was cancelled, fearing that Nanace and her minions would scold her relentlessly. Just before entering her classroom, Wakaba suddenly heard someone shout her name, startling her. Turning around, she realized it was none other than our fat boy, who wasted no time throwing himself to the ground, profusely apologizing for standing her up. Wakaba assured him it was fine and then pleaded with Haruto to stand. Next, she demanded to know what kind of emergency had warranted stranding her like that. Although Haruto knew saving Teichai was a noble deed, he admitted he had nearly lost his life playing superhero. Yet, when he responded, he apologized for lying, And just as Wakaba thought he might finally reveal the truth, Haruto flipped the script, doubling down with a lie that he had overslept, surprising Wakaba and even the devil himself. Staring into her eyes, Haruto claimed he had been enjoying peaceful sleep and had forgotten about their date entirely. However, Wakaba saw through the deception and wondered why he had chosen to lie despite his heroic act. Curious, Wakaba then asked Haruto if he was fine, to which he replied that he was okay. To confirm, she raised her voice and pressed him again, asking if he was absolutely certain he wasn't hurt, and Haruto saluted her, assuring her he was in perfect condition. Smiling, Wakaba mentioned that, for keeping her waiting, Haruto owed her a treat at the cake shop after school, adding that if he did so, she'd forgive and forget the whole ordeal, and Haruto instantly agreed. The next day in class, Wakaba nervously clutched a wrapped bento box, her thoughts drifting to how, the previous afternoon at the cake shop, Haruto had asked her to send the selfie from their first date. Since Wakaba felt she looked more like Scooby-Doo in the photo, she refused to share it. Instead, they struck a deal, and she promised to make bentos, Haruto's favorite, for him. So, during lunch break, she decided to head to Haruto's class to deliver them. But on the way, she bumped into two ugly dudes who claimed to be twins. Known as the Dale brothers, these two were popular around school, acting like the FBI with info on every student. Wakaba introduced herself to the twins and explained she was looking for Haruto. Naturally, they asked why she wanted to see him, and before she could fully respond, the twins crowded her, revealing they'd heard plenty about her since Haruto had practically told everyone about his new chick. One twin noted that Haruto was a pretty interesting guy despite being built like an android logo, while the other praised Haruto's fearless, outspoken nature. However, they added that they needed Wakaba's help to teach Haruto about the 3D world, so he'd stop acting childish. Furthermore, the Dale brothers shared that, not long ago, a fight had broken out in class between two random junkies. As soon as Haruto spotted the brawl, he rushed in to settle it amicably, but in his good Samaritan efforts, he took punches to both sides of his puffy face. Nevertheless, Haruto eventually stopped the fight by roping them into a ridiculous otaku debate. Impressed by this praise from Haruto's classmates, Wakaba felt a surge of admiration for Haruto. After bidding her goodbye, the twins directed Wakaba to Haruto's location. Upon arriving, she found Haruto excitedly bragging about how he'd gathered enough knowledge from Steamy Games to develop a plot with his girl. The class rep, a sweet girl named Lizuka, told him to chill, teasing that when it came to the real thing, he'd freeze and couldn't even kiss a girl. Undeterred, Haruto kept boasting, even gushing about how cute his girlfriend was. He then described running a simulation of his first romantic night with her, yapping about how they'd passionately kiss, startling Wakaba, who stood behind him. At that moment, deep in thought, Wakaba debated whether to alert Haruto to her presence or let him continue his cultured performance. Just then, Bizun and Shu noticed Wakaba waving at them and frantically signaled Haruto to stop his madness. But the inflated frog was too far gone in his antics. Suddenly, Haruto heard a female voice behind him, and as he turned, he froze, shocked to see Wakaba standing there. Nervously, Haruto stammered, asking what Wakaba was doing in his class. Calmly, Wakaba replied that she had something to discuss with him. Immediately, the rest of Haruto's classmates began gossiping about her presence. Shu approached Wakaba and asked if she was surprised by Haruto's rowdiness, to which she admitted she was a bit taken aback. However, Shu explained that, despite Haruto's loud nature, his reputation in class was quite different. Shu added that even though Haruto often played the clown, no one ever spoke ill of him. Furthermore, Shu assured her that if she stuck with Haruto for a year, she'd start to see his good qualities, too. In conclusion, Shu noted that, while Haruto might seem noisy, he was really just a cheerful soul who made everyone smile. With that, Wakaba called out to Haruto, and as he turned anxiously, he immediately apologized for her witnessing his psycho moment. Brushing it off, Wakaba said it was fine, showed him the bento box, and shyly asked him to eat lunch with her. Upon hearing this, tears unknowingly streamed down Haruto's face, and he shouted that he was the luckiest guy alive to have such an angel for a girlfriend. Lizuka then approached Wakaba, commending her bravery for choosing Haruto as her babe and assuring her she could come to talk anytime. Shortly afterward, Wakaba was surprised when Haruto mouth fed her a bite. Tasting the bento she'd made, Wakaba commented on how great the seasoning was. Still, Haruto, worried, apologized again for the attitude she'd seen in class, explaining he'd gone off the rails. He begged her not to see him as a barbarian, but Wakaba smiled, turned to him, and said she wasn't bothered anymore. She also told him to drop the formality of her last name and just call her Wakaba, delighting Haruto endlessly. Excitedly, Haruto confessed it had always been his dream for a girl to say that, so Wakaba teased, asking if he had any other dreams she could fulfill. As they ate lunch, they joked and laughed, marking the first day Wakaba truly had fun at school. The following week at Wakaba's home, Wakaba urged Futaba to hurry up, and together, they set off for school. On the way, Futaba remarked that Wakaba's tone and manner of speaking had softened, happily adding that she loved this new side of her sister. Soon after, Futaba dashed off toward her own school and bid Wakaba goodbye. Now alone, Wakaba quickened her pace, eager to reach the rendezvous point where they walked to school together before Haruto. Unfortunately, Haruto was already there, which only irritated Wakaba. It had been a whole week since they started using first names, and while it was cringe at first, now it rolled off the tongue like they'd been doing it forever. The weirdest part is that whenever she was near Haruto, some mysterious warmth bubbled up inside her, like heartburn, but with feelings, though she couldn't quite understand why. As they strolled to school, Wakaba chattered about her family the entire time while Haruto simply smiled and listened attentively. Upon arriving, Wakaba accompanied Haruto to his classroom to drop off the bento she'd prepared for him. Entering the room, she encountered Lizuka, who praised her for being a wife material to Haruto. Meanwhile, Haruto faced teasing from Bizin, who mentioned that plenty of simps were burning with jealousy over his very fine girlfriend. Running late for her first lesson, Wakaba said her goodbyes and hurried to her own class. Once there, she sat down, but before she could catch her breath, Nane stomped over, banged her desk, and sarcastically commended her efforts. Then, Nane's remarked she knew it was all a game, yet given how Wakaba had been clinging to Porkfist, she wondered if it was still just a game to her. Hearing Nane's roast Haruto as Porkfist infuriated Wakaba, sparking her anger. Noticing her shift in expression, Nanes asked why she was getting so worked up over the cow. Additionally, Nanes pointed out that, over the past few days, she'd observed Wakaba had stopped playing with her dolls, and her face had noticeably brightened. That said, Nanes began to leave, encouraging Wakaba to keep up the amazing work. Just as Nanes departed, Wakaba struggled to contain her anger, clenching her fists tightly. Suddenly, a literal mother duck appeared out of nowhere in front of her, startling Wakaba. Wakaba quickly recognized the Smurf as Yajima, a classmate she rarely spoke to or had any connection with. Yajima, too, had kept her distance from Nanes and her bunch of vials. Curious, Wakaba asked the leprechaun what she wanted, and Yajima responded by asking how hard it was to be the school's fat mother sucker's girlfriend. Instantly offended, Wakaba clenched her fist and was about to punch the doll flying. But when she noticed Yajima crying for no apparent reason, she hit pause and asked what the problem was. Tearfully, Yajima explained that Wakaba used to wear a scary expression in class, so she decided to help before Wakaba did something drastic. Like take her own life. Still sobbing, Yajima admitted she'd been a coward, too afraid to stand up for Wakaba when Nanes and her group bullied her. At that moment, Wakaba concluded that the pint-sized girl was brave, unlike the rest of the class, for mustering the courage to approach her, and she had also considered standing up to Nanes and her cronies herself. Grateful, Wakaba thanked Yajima and assured her she was okay. She also told Yajima that, contrary to popular belief, Haruto was an incredibly kind person, surprising her Yajima. Furthermore, Wakaba insisted that if Yajima truly felt sorry for her past struggles, she'd stop calling Haruto names. Just then, spotting Nanes nearing the door, Wakaba urged Yajima to leave, warning that being seen together could spell trouble for her. As Yajima darted to her seat, Wakaba felt an unfamiliar calmness wash over her, something she'd never experienced at school, and wondered if it was tied to Haruto's presence in her life. After school that day, Wakaba and Haruto met up for their usual walk home. She noticed that whenever she was with Haruto, time seemed to fly by too quickly. They couldn't stop at the train station because Haruto had to run errands for his mom, so Wakaba decided to go to the station alone. Upon arriving, she saw the station was crowded, but wasn't too surprised, given Christmas was approaching. Suddenly, Wakaba spotted Haruto with an older woman and ducked into hiding, wondering if the middle-aged lady was his sugar mommy. Meanwhile, Haruto's mom grumbled that her lazy son had left her to carry the groceries despite promising to handle them. Observing the woman's playfulness and aggressiveness with Haruto, Wakaba began to doubt her sugar mommy theory, considering they might just be friends. Yet, still confused, she flipped back to her original suspicion. Now convinced the woman was indeed a sugar mommy, and questioned why Haruto had accepted her confession if he was into cougars. Noticing they were moving out of sight, Wakaba shifted for a better view but slipped and crashed to the ground. Alarmed by her fall, Haruto rushed over, hands full of groceries, and tried to help her up. Concerned, Haruto demanded to know why Wakaba was at the station when her home was in the opposite direction. Before Wakaba could answer, Haruto's mom interrupted, asking who the girl was. Haruto introduced Wakaba as his girlfriend, and upon hearing this, his mom reacted with a mix of shock and delight. The mom exclaimed that she'd never imagined Haruto could bag a fine jewel, and because of that, she was now seeing him in a new light. Playfully, Haruto's mom added she'd been worried Haruto preferred sausages over wet mushy turkey slices. Overjoyed, she hugged Wakaba, thanking her for turning her worthless virgin son into a man she could be proud of. In that instant, Wakaba realized the woman was Haruto's mom and marveled at how youthful she looked. Politely, Wakaba introduced herself, and the mom, in turn, presented herself as Natsuki, adding that her son was now in Wakaba's care. Curious, Natsuki asked if Wakaba was heading home, and Wakaba explained her mom had sent her to pick up some items. So, Natsuki instructed Haruto to assist his girlfriend with her task. Haruto protested, asking who'd carry her bags if he went, but Natsuki assured him she could manage alone. Smirking, she told Wakaba to make her son work hard since all he did was play games all year. With that, Haruto urged Wakaba to leave quickly. As they walked off, Wakaba apologized for causing trouble, but Haruto brushed it off, warning that if they'd stayed longer, his mom might have held her hostage. Just then, Wakaba glanced back and saw Natsuki shedding tears of joy, moved that her loser son, whom she'd feared would die an old hairless virgin, had finally found love. Surprised, Wakaba turned forward, ignoring Haruto's question about whether she was okay, and urged him to pick up the pace so they wouldn't miss the limited edition item she needed to buy. After finishing grocery shopping, Haruto suggested they have tea, to which Wakaba agreed, though she also threw in the idea of visiting the bakery since they'd added new items to the menu. While heading to the bakery, they unexpectedly bumped into Futaba, prompting Wakaba to introduce Futaba to Haruto as her twin sister. Futaba then remarked that it was the first time she'd seen her sister walking side by side with a guy, and then teasingly asked Wakaba if Haruto was the special friend she'd always mentioned. Before Wakaba could respond, a couple of Futaba's friends rushed toward her, shouting her name. Noticing their frustration over being ditched, Futaba apologized, admitting she could sometimes be careless and forgetful. Next, Futaba introduced her friends to Wakaba, and the friends also introduced themselves as Yukari, Kazuho, and Nita. Suddenly, Yukari caught sight of Haruto and froze as if she'd seen a ghost. Both Yukari and Kazuho stepped closer to confirm it was really Haruto, and after the confirmation, they asked how he was even there. Feeling shy, Haruto replied that it had been a long time since they last seen, while a shocked Wakaba inquired if Haruto knew the girls. Still in disbelief, Yukari and Kazuho explained they'd been so worried about Haruto. They emphasized that Haruto had changed his phone number and email, making it impossible for anyone to reach him, prompting a now concerned Futaba to demand how they knew him. Haruto clarified that he'd attended the same school as the chicks until he transferred midway. Bowing his head, Haruto apologized to Yukari and Kazuho for not informing them before vanishing without a trace. The girls stood there, stunned, and seeing Wakaba equally confused, Haruto grabbed her hand and introduced her to them as his one and only true love. Infuriated, Wakaba shouted at Haruto, ordering him not to get ahead of himself. Stepping forward, Wakaba approached Yukari and Kazuho to confirm if they were truly his classmates, which they affirmed. Curious, Wakaba then asked what Haruto was like in tween school. Yukari responded that Haruto was now completely different from his old self. Yukari recounted how, back in school, Haruto had been a gloomy, nervous loser, constantly bullied but always defended by Shu. Kazuho chimed in, revealing that over the years, Haruto worked on his personality, gradually stopping the bullying, though his timidness lingered. The girls added that they, along with Shu, had helped Haruto with studies, noting English was the only subject in which Haruto excelled. The girls explained that Haruto had been embarrassed his father was an English teacher, unaware that it was why he was so good at it. Additionally, the girls mentioned that Haruto's mom had passed away, piquing Wakaba's interest. Wakaba asked for confirmation that Haruto had no mother, and Kazuho clarified that, back then, it was just Haruto and his dad. Kazuho stressed how much Haruto loved his father until tragedy struck. Intrigued, Wakaba urged Kazuho to spill the details about what happened. Kazuho revealed that, in their second year of school, Haruto was bullied so badly he fell down the stairs, injured his legs, and was rushed to the hospital. His dad, informed of the accident, panicked. Tragically, while rushing to the hospital, Haruto's dad was struck and killed by an oncoming truck. Hearing this heartbreaking story, Wakaba stood frozen, wondering why Haruto had never shared it with her. At that moment, Wakaba recalled how Haruto had always spoken of his dad in the past tense. Kazuho further disclosed that Haruto's father's death shattered him, leading Haruto to ghost everyone and eventually transfer schools. Kazuho added that seeing Haruto happy after so long brought her relief, and then thanked Wakaba for being the source of his joy. Reflecting on this, Wakaba remembered all those times she and Haruto had walked to school together, and she'd ramble about her family, complaining endlessly, while Haruto just smiled. This realization made Wakaba feel like an insensitive jerk, even though she hadn't known about Haruto's tragic past or the impact it had on him. Overwhelmed, Wakaba broke down in tears, and seeing her sob, Futaba asked if she was okay, but Wakaba brushed it off, claiming she was fine. As Wakaba cried uncontrollably, Yukari and Kazuho rushed to her, puzzled by her sudden mood swings. Concerned, Haruto suggested they skip tea and head home instead, handing her a tissue to wipe her tears. Accepting it, Wakaba cleaned her face, and together they started home. Midway, Haruto apologized for hiding his backstory, explaining he didn't want her pity. Curious, Wakaba asked if Haruto had overheard her talk with Futaba's friends, to which Haruto confirmed he did, boasting he had sharp hearing. Wakaba suddenly bowed and apologized for being insensitive all this while, not knowing Haruto had gone through so much, and yet all she did was talk about herself. Gently, Haruto called her name and asked why she looked so sad. Casually, Haruto noted that his tragedy happened 2 years ago, and he'd since moved on. With a thumbs up, Haruto added that if Wakaba still felt bad, she could make it up by packing his next bento with extra snacks, making them even. Yet, Wakaba saw through his facade, recalling how, on their first date, Haruto had stared at Teichai and his father with a pained expression. In the present, Haruto assured Wakaba he enjoyed hearing about her parents and family. Haruto added that when Wakaba spoke of her mom, dad, and sister, she wore a smile he adored. Emphasizing this, Haruto made it clear he always wanted to see her smile, touching Wakaba deeply, so she thanked him. Furthermore, Haruto advised Wakaba not to apologize so much and to be shameless like his mom. Speaking of his mom, Haruto revealed that the woman Wakaba had met earlier was his real mom, who separated from him when he was young. Haruto clarified that, before his dad's death, he'd thought she was dead. Haruto explained that his mom, born into the prestigious Bizan family, had fled their strict lifestyle, met his dad, and fallen in love. They married and had Haruto, but his birth brought misfortune. His dad lost everything to a crypto scam, plunging into debt. To settle it, the Bizan family forced Natsuki to divorce his father and return home, where she later married a washed-up rapper and had Mafuyu. 2 years after his dad's death, Mafuyu appeared from only God knows where, informing a grieving Haruto that his mom was alive and wanted to reunite. Thus, he began living with her and his half-sister. Intrigued, Wakaba asked if, since his late father was an English teacher, Haruto dreamed of following in his footsteps. Haruto warned Wakaba not to mock him if he shared his goal, and she promised she wouldn't. Haruto revealed that because his mom was taken away at his birth and never held him, his dream was to find someone he loved, marry her, build a home, and have a child bearing his name, giving his mom a chance to hold her grandchild. Covering his face in embarrassment, Haruto begged Wakaba not to laugh, but Wakaba assured him it was a beautiful dream and then offered her full support. Following this conversation, Hachiro suggested they head home, to which Wakaba agreed, citing that it was getting cold. While they headed home, their hands brushed against each other, and eventually, they got to hold hands. Wakaba felt blessed to have been given the opportunity to get to know Haruto as a person. She discovered that Haruto easily got carried away. He was a little bit cultured, and most of all, he was very far from the word handsome. However, Haruto had the strength to laugh off anything that bothered him, and he also had the ability to make others laugh. At that moment, Wakaba placed all the missing pieces together and realized that she had fallen deeply in love with the chubby boy. Later that evening, as they got to Wakaba's crib, she thanked Haruto for spending the day with her, and then, out of nowhere, pressed a sweet kiss to Haruto's balloon cheeks, shocking him. Wakaba explained that the kiss was just her little way of showing her gratitude, and then, seeing how flustered Haruto was, Wakaba asked if she had gone too far. Since the day Wakaba gave Haruto a kiss on the cheek, the two had been inseparable and started acting like real lovers. They were glued together like Romeo and Juliet, always making plans for date after date. Over time, Wakaba even stopped using normal speech when talking to Haruto, instead adopting the sweet, lovey-dovey tone of a girl deeply in love. For Wakaba, being around Haruto was unbelievably comforting, to the point where she started envisioning a long-term relationship with him. She couldn't even think about school life without Haruto occupying her thoughts. Before long, Wakaba brought a special lunchbox filled with homemade bentos to school just for Haruto. After tasting her cooking, Bizen and Shu found themselves envious, wishing they could also get a girlfriend willing to play the wifely role. The boys brought up Haruto's birthday and how they had already bought him presents. Wakaba, caught off guard, chimed in, asking why Haruto hadn't told her about it. Wakaba stated that if she had known, she would have also bought Haruto a gift and celebrated with him. However, the extra-large lover boy simply smiled and told Wakaba he had already received the best birthday present, which was her becoming his girlfriend. This unexpected confession made Wakaba blush so hard she nearly combusted on the spot. Later that evening, back at Wakaba's home, her parents casually discussed how she had been noticeably energetic and in high spirits over the past few days. Shortly after, Futaba strolled into Wakaba's room, relaying how their parents had been gossiping about her unusual behavior. Curious, Futaba outright asked if Wakaba's relationship with Haruto was the reason for her glowing mood, and then pressed for details. With a small sigh, Wakaba admitted that while Haruto loved teasing her, he still genuinely looked out for her. Futaba, still in disbelief, remarked that she had been shocked to hear Wakaba was in a relationship with Haruto, especially considering Haruto was a walking turn-off for 90% of the female population. But to her surprise, Wakaba only smiled. Wakaba confessed that once upon a time, she had been all about a guy's looks. But now, just being around Haruto made her heart race. Wakaba explained that the reason was simple. Haruto was the kind of person who would give his all, even for someone he barely knew. That was exactly why she loved him so much. Futaba groaned, stating that just listening to Wakaba blush over Haruto was making her both embarrassed and jealous. Futaba then jokingly declared that she, too, wanted a boyfriend. Intrigued, Futaba asked Wakaba how she had managed to land such a wonderful guy. Wakaba paused, considering the question, but of course, she wasn't about to spill the truth that it had all started as a dangerous game. Instead, Wakaba forced a laugh and casually lied, saying she couldn't quite remember how it happened, only that she had simply gone with the flow. When Futaba persisted for more details, Wakaba quickly faked exhaustion, claiming she hadn't been sleeping well and needed rest. As Futaba exited Wakaba's room, Wakaba's thoughts drifted elsewhere. It had been weeks since Nanace and her minions had last made a move, almost as if they had forgotten about the game entirely. But deep down, Wakabe couldn't shake the feeling that they were merely lying in wait, planning the perfect moment to strike. Still, she brushed the thought aside. At that moment, she tried convincing herself that her relationship with Haruto wasn't because of Nanace's threats. This wasn't some forced outcome, it was real. It wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't a lie. The next day at school, sitting in class, Wakaba thought about how Haruto would help her with English assessment, and the mere idea of meeting Haruto sent butterflies swarming in her stomach. But reality came crashing down before she could get too lost in her daydream. Nanace, flanked by her two ever-present side characters, strutted over and casually dropped her latest demand. Wakaba's next mission was to exchange saliva with Haruto. Wakaba admitted it wouldn't be easy, but if Haruto got too edgy, she might just give him all her liquid. Her bold response sent shockwaves through the trio, leaving Nanace momentarily speechless. Recovering quickly, Nanace demanded to know why Wakaba took the whole thing so lightly. Toramaki, completely bewildered, asked if she was high or something and why she was talking so flirty about that disgusting pig. But Wakaba simply assured them she was perfectly fine and then questioned why Nanace and her raggedy squad were acting strange. After all, Wakaba pointed out that she was just talking about her supposed boyfriend, and then also informed Nanace and her pity party that even that day, she had made a lunchbox for Haruto just to make him happy. Teasingly, Wakaba asked Nanace what she thought, and if she had done the right thing. Nanace and her squad, however, weren't even listening anymore. They stood frozen in shock, horror written all over their faces as they processed Wakaba's words. She had spoken about Haruto with genuine affection, like a girl who was actually in love. Fuming, Nanace immediately snapped and demanded to know if it was Wakaba's way of getting back at them. Nanes angrily pointed out that since Wakaba was obviously enjoying her time with the Shrek, Nanes swore she would make Wakaba date Haruto until the end of time, and then stormed out with her squad. Just as the menaces left, Wakaba received a message from Haruto asking they go out after school. Even receiving trifle texts and conversation from Haruto was enough to make Wakaba all giddy, and the apprehension she used to have about coming to school was beginning to vanish. Now, going to school was more fun because she got to meet the person she loved. As soon as the final bell rang, signifying the close of school, Wakade wasted no time, grabbed her bag, and zoomed off, eager to meet her heartthrob, Haruto. But just outside her class, Vixen blocked her, asked her to stop, and then informed her that he had already told Haruto that she wouldn't be meeting him up that day. Furious and a bit curious, Wakaba asked Vixen what he meant and why he did that, to which Vixen replied, saying he did that because he wanted to have a little chat with her. Vixen suggested they head to the rooftop to have a chat to prevent anyone from eavesdropping on their conversation. Getting a bit nervous now, Wakaba asked Vixen to chill and then exclaimed that she did not understand what he was talking about. Vixen coldly replied, saying it was nothing much. All he wanted was to get a clear understanding of the game she and her friends had been playing. Making her way to the rooftop, Wakaba, trembling, nervously made it up the stairs with the thought that no matter what happened, she never wanted to lose Haruto. Clutching the door leading to the rooftop, Wakaba understood that she was wrong for deceiving Haruto, and everything that had happened was her fault. But at this point, no matter how much she regretted it, it would never be enough, and it would never erase her mistake because the sin of her past had actually caught up to her. Stepping onto the rooftop, the cold, chilly breeze caressed her face, forcing her to close her eyes. Vixen, who had been waiting for her there, approached Wakaba, apologized for inviting her to the rooftop when it was cold and promised not to waste her time but jumped straight into business. Vixen asked Wakaba if the game was to prepare a fake confession with Haruto as the target and then later reveal it to him to completely shatter Haruto's heart. Wakaba just stood there silent and nervous, wondering why she would start the explanation. Vixen went on asking Wakaba if she was in any way a part of the demonic game. Wakaba, with her head bowed, paused for over a minute before she finally stammered yes, seeing that there was no reason to hide it anymore from Vixen since the dude already caught on. Wakaba decided to spill the truth and reveal everything. She told Vixen how she had been bullied by her classmates, how she accidentally broke a compact mirror and was then forced to participate in the punishment game. But hearing all this, Vixen snapped, yelling at Wakaba, asking why she had decided to involve Haruto in her stupid games. Vixen eventually calmed down, apologized for yelling, and then explained that the first time he had heard about the silly game, he had never expected Wakaba to be a part of it. However, Vixen clarified that during break time, he was walking down to a certain classroom following the back of the building. And then he overheard Nanes and some other chick talking about the devious plan. Curious, he cornered one of Nanes' friends, Xiaojo, and threatened to delete her IG account if she refused to spill the truth. So after the threat, Xiaojo lied about Wakaba being the mastermind behind the game. According to Vixen, Xiaojo lied that Wakaba was the sadistic wench who had decided to have fun with Haruto. But hearing this, Wakaba tried telling Vixen that it was all cap, and that she was set up. Still, Vixen made it known that he couldn't care less about the words of some random chick. But no matter how he looked at it, he still couldn't grasp how a hot girl like Wakaba, who was good at taking care of people, would suddenly develop feelings for the least attractive guy in school, and then confess to him. Gritting, Vixen mentioned that now that he thought about it, Wakaba's confession that day was really weird. Vixen added that if Shu had been present that day of the confession, he would have noticed something was off. Hearing all Vixen had to say, Wakaba knew that a simple apology wouldn't just wash away the fact that she deceived a boy as cheerful and kind as Haruto. So, she begged Vixen not to let Haruto know. Vixen flinched and said there was no way he could tell Haruto since the dude was already deeply in love with her. Vixen mentioned that during lunchtime every day, Haruto would talk for hours about how wonderful and kind his girlfriend was, and even mentioned some weird stuff about her making his dream come true. Hearing this, Wakaba froze in shock, but Vixen, with a smirk, assured her that now that he was aware of everything going on, it was time to put an end to the rotten game. Smirking like an evil villain, Vixen assured Wakaba that he would ensure that everyone who took part in the evil game would suffer 1,000 years of pain, causing Wakaba to shudder in fear. Furthermore, Vixen stated that he could care less if his action got him expelled or would have to force him to leave the soccer club. After all, Vixen mentioned that he would take over the family business, and he had been fortunate enough to have enjoyed school life, so he was content. Wakaba stood there in shock and tried to say something, but Bixen shut her up almost immediately and made it known that he had no intention of saying anything more to her. However, Bixen warned that Wakaba had to keep up with the love pretense with Haruto like she normally did. Wakaba knew Bixen was right because there was no way she would reveal the truth to Haruto and still be able to date him. Even worse, she would never be able to smile in front of Haruto anymore, which would make him worried. Wakaba knew she would have to keep up with the deception. She would have to keep on lying to Haruto, and that on its own was the highest level of punishment. Wakaba began to shiver, and noticing this, Bixen assured her that he wasn't planning on going John Wick on them, and he still wasn't planning on sending anyone to the hospital either, just to teach them some hard lessons. Before leaving, Bixen warned Wakaba that if she tried speaking to anyone about what they'd discussed, then he wouldn't be merciful to her either, and she would never get to see Haruto again. Bixen let Wakaba know that he hated lies and liars, and also reminded Wakaba that she wasn't innocent either because she played a major part in the sadistic game and hence carried a part of the blame. Just as Bixen left the rooftop, Wakaba stood there questioning her life decision. The strength in her legs gave up, and she stumbled on the floor. She cried bitterly because she knew in the end she had only valued herself and was more afraid of hurting herself than hurting others. At that moment, she only wished that when Haruto got to find out, he wouldn't come to hate her with every fiber in his body. Wakaba pictured Haruto's assuring smile, which she might never get to see again, and then how Haruto was the sun that brightened the world of everyone he came in contact with, while she was like a rain cloud filled with sadness. In her mind, Wakaba concluded that there was no need to think about it. She cried because she was certain that in just a matter of time, it would soon be all over. While Wakaba cried bitterly, wishing Haruto could forgive her, Haruto somehow was on the rooftop, hiding on the other side of the boulder directly opposite her. He overheard everything and couldn't help but cry worse than a heartbroken girl, unable to believe what he just heard. Barely even making her way back to class, Wakaba could not stop thinking that Haruto truly loved her. She also could not shake off the harsh words Bixen had said on the rooftop. Just then, midway to class, Wakaba sighted Yajima chatting with another girl named Kyuju. So, she approached them, and after seeing expression on Wakaba's face, Kyuju asked if she had a fight with her boyfriend, Haruto. But with no response from Wakaba, Kyuju mentioned that she had seen Haruto earlier on, and he too looked kinda off. Kyuju also mentioned that she saw Bixen descending the stairs and muttering something under his breath like a madman about doing something bad to Nanes. Upon hearing this, Wakaba took off, explaining that she had to take her leave because she had an urgent matter to deal with. At the end of class that day, the evil Nanes approached Wakaba and informed her that their plan would be ending soon, and it was almost time for Wakaba to let the cat out of the bag by telling Haruto the truth. The little Yajima who overheard this lunged herself towards Nanes, embracing her and begging her not to cajole Wakaba into doing such a horrible thing. Nanes immediately told the Rugrat to shut up and warned her not to play the good girl now. Nanes told Yajima that she had been quiet all this time, even after knowing what was happening, so it would be in her best interest if she remained quiet. Turning back to Wakaba, Nanes told her that she should be grateful that she was even willing to end her little loved-up play pretend with the disgusting pig. At that moment, Wakaba realized Nanes was right. It was the agreement after all, but still, it had all been Nanes' fault who had orchestrated the evil plan. If she hadn't planned it all, Haruto would have still been living his peaceful life without meeting her. Just then, Wakaba snapped at Nanes, reminding her that it was all her fault. Wakaba grabbed Nanes by the collar and blurted out that she could not reveal the truth to Haruto, but she could still tell him she loved him. Intrigued, Nanes asked Wakaba what the heck she was talking about since the plan was to lie that she loved Haruto and not actually fall in love with him. Nanes reminded Wakaba that they were accomplices, and after realizing there was no cap to what Nanes said, Wakaba angrily stormed off to Haruto's class. On getting inside the class, Wakaba ran into one of the Dale brothers, who informed her that Haruto had left school early, claiming that he had some urgent matter to attend to. At that moment, a message notification chimed on Wakaba's phone, and when she checked the message, it was a message from Haruto informing her that he had gone home because he had stuff to do. As Wakaba sorrowfully turned to leave, the Dale brother burned her already shattered heart to ashes when he reminded her that Haruto truly loved her, and then urged her to please take care of him. Wakaba couldn't take it anymore. She bolted out of there faster than a cheetah on an energy drink. Getting home, she burst into her house and immediately collapsed on the ground. Seeing Wakaba drenched in sweat like she had been working out in the hot Sahara, Futaba, worried, asked what the matter was. Before Wakaba could even respond, the mom jumped in, congratulating Wakaba for finally getting herself a boyfriend. This only boiled Wakaba's blood to the max, and out of rage, she yelled at them to shut up. The dad, who had joined in the conversation, was shocked at her sudden outburst and asked Wakaba to chill. But Wakaba screamed that she hated all of them. She hurriedly thumped the stairs up her room and slammed the door behind her. While slumped on the floor leaning on the door, Wakaba could not believe that all in one day, she had run away from her classmates, her friends, and now her precious family. The only person who could calm her now was Haruto. In a dream that night, Wakaba found herself still donned in her school uniform, surrounded by a mist of thick smoke. When the smoke slowly dissipated, she found Haruto standing in front of her, back turned. She nervously tapped his back, but Haruto angrily slapped her hand away like she had leprosy. With his back still turned, Haruto angrily asked Wakaba why she had lied to him all this while. Not waiting for a reply, Haruto mentioned that Wakaba must have had fun watching an ugly, unattractive, fat creep like him get all worked up and excited. With a dark shadow of anger cast on his face, Haruto turned to Wakaba, called her a call girl, and warned her never to come close to him. As Haruto began to dip, Wakaba stretched her hand, trying to stop him from leaving. She grabbed his jacket and promised to fix all of her bad traits and even allow him pipe her if that was what he wanted. As she begged Haruto not to hate her, Wakaba jolted out of the dream and realized it had all been a nightmare. Determined to see Haruto by all means, Wakaba hurriedly put on her uniform and started to leave for school. While at the door, Futaba tried talking to her, asking what the matter was and why she had been acting weird since she came home the day before. Futaba asked Wakaba if the reason she was all cranky was because she had told their mom about her relationship with Haruto. But Wakaba replied, saying that was not the reason. Futaba then demanded to know if Haruto had done anything to her, to which Wakaba still replied no, explaining that Haruto wasn't to be blamed. Wakaba told Futaba that someone like her would never understand what she was going through because she had always been a cheerful girl with a lot of friends, unlike a gloomy creep like her who had no friends. Wakaba shouted at Futaba that she knew absolutely nothing about what she was going through, and then asked to be left alone. On hearing what Wakaba had always thought of her, Futaba was shocked and then broke down in tears. However, Wakaba walked out of her feeling terrible while Futaba continued crying. On her way to school, Wakaba texted Haruto to ask if he would be coming that day. In addition, Wakaba said she had something important to tell him and asked that they meet at their usual rendezvous behind the school building. So later that day, behind the school building, Wakaba arrived and was shocked when she found Haruto already waiting for her. Nervously, she tried explaining something before Haruto cut her almost immediately and told her that he had heard everything. Will Haruto ever be able to forgive Wakaba? Comment Fat Boy Lover. If you're eager to find out in our part 2, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.